Let's get right into it. So first of all, I would like to thank all the sponsors in the screen right now for sponsoring the Canadian Cloud Summit. So thank you very much for all these sponsors. So without I know without these sponsors, it's not easy to organize such a great event, such a great summit. So thank you very much for sponsoring Canadian Cloud Summit. Uh, and also, you guys can have an opportunity to win an Amazon gift card by providing feedback for my session. So you guys have a code that you guys should use to provide feedback. But as Matt told, it's not compulsory to use that code. If you do prefer using the code, you guys can use the code 307548 and make Matt's life easier. So
I was gonna say, like, don't give him a choice.
yeah, so you guys can you simply use that code. I have it in the screen right now, and I have uh, in my last slides as well. So you guys simply can use that code and provide me with feedback. Right, talking about my session title, this session is based on the Power Query feature in Azure Data Factory. I've been interested about this feature ever since it was available in public preview in 2019. I think it was around November. Uh, what I'll be sharing in this session is basically my viewpoint in terms of where should Power Query in Azure Data Factory fit in a modern data warehouse. Uh, Now, when I'm presenting this session, I'm also assuming that you guys have the basic knowledge in modern data warehouse solutions and Azure Data Factory and data ingestion with Azure Data Factory. And if not, that's completely fine. You guys can, in case if you guys find something confusing, you guys can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to help you out. So I at the latter part of my in my last slides, I'll be having my LinkedIn contact as well. So you guys can connect with me on LinkedIn and ask any questions you guys have. Otherwise, I'll be going through some basics in modern data warehouse solutions in this session as well, just to build some context for you guys. So yeah, it would be covered for certain extent as well. For those who don't know me, I'm Thimantha Vidanagamage. I love working with Microsoft Data Platform technologies such as Microsoft Power BI, Azure Analysis Services, and Azure Data Factory. And the most important thing that you see in the screen right now, out of what you see in the screen right now, is my Twitter handle at Thimantha. So please follow me on Twitter at Thimantha as well. So moving into the agenda for today, firstly, I will take you through the modern data warehouse and its architecture, and later on we'll look at data preparation in the modern data warehouse. And finally, I'll be wrapping up this session by showing you how to engage in no-code data preparation in a modern data warehouse. Right, moving into a modern data warehouse. Firstly, it's important for us to understand what is a modern data warehouse, right? So a modern data warehouse is a data platform that is specifically catering for analytical purposes. And you can bring all types of data together in a modern data warehouse, including structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. So modern data warehouses are highly scalable and flexible as well. So when it comes to scalability, scalability is coming from the scalability of the Azure resources used in the modern data warehouse, so the Azure instances used in the modern data warehouse. And flexibility is coming from the data lake concept that's followed in the modern data warehouse. So that's just a bit about a modern data warehouse. So since you guys have some understanding of a modern data warehouse, let's look at a modern data warehouse reference architecture. So what you see in the screen right now is a modern data warehouse reference architecture. And you can see the key components of this architecture, which are ingest, show, prep and train, model and serve. Now, if I just brief you in terms of how this architecture works, so firstly we have data coming in from data ingested from multiple data sources and stored in Azure Data Lake. And the stored data is prepped and loaded into transformed and loaded into Azure Synapse Analytics or a data warehouse. And that data is loaded into a data model, or you can call it a semantic model in Azure Analysis Services. And the Azure Analysis Services is used to uh, provide analytics with Power BI. So that's just a very brief description or a very brief explanation of how this architecture works. But yeah, there are a lot of different ways of looking at this. So I'm not going to build any complexity. So that's just basically how the flow works in this particular architecture. And just to let you guys know, this is actually an outdated modern data warehouse architecture. So the updated modern data warehouse architecture is entirely based on Azure Synapse Analytics. And the reason I thought of going with the outdated version is that because the outdated version uses a variety of Azure resources, and there is a less possibility to confuse you guys with uh, the outdated version. But if I would have gone with the updated version or the latest version of this architecture, which is entirely based on Azure Synapse Analytics, it might confuse you guys because uh, it's basically based on Azure Synapse Analytics, and there is no Azure Data Factory, Azure Databricks, so whatever you see in the screen right now. So it might confuse you, so which is why I went for an outdated version of this architecture. And now, with this entire architecture in mind, what we'll be focusing on in this session is this particular section, which is store and data preparation, or prep and train. So what we'll be focusing is how we engage in data preparation, how does Power Query in Azure Data Factory, which is a data preparation feature, fit in a modern data warehouse. All right. So that is basically that is something that is the entire purpose of this session. Now, since you guys have an understanding of this reference architecture and the modern data warehouse itself, it's time to have a good understanding of what data preparation is. Now, data extracted from multiple data sources might not always be prepared for analytical purposes, right? It might be prepared for several other purposes as well, such as transactional processing, right? So it's important to prepare this data for analytical purposes, and this process is called data preparation. And there are two key tasks involved in data preparation, which are data cleansing and data transformations. And data cleansing is about cleaning up the data, and data transformations is about changing the shape of the data. And data cleansing and data transformations gradually improve the data quality and data accuracy. For example, if you take a look at data cleansing tasks like replacing the null values by a specific value in a specific column, that would obviously improve the data quality and accuracy, right? And if you, in terms of data transformations, if you merge two particular tables, if you merge or join two tables, and use it for analytical purposes, that would gradually improve the data quality and accuracy as well, right? So basically, that shows you that those are just two key examples of how data cleansing and data transformations work. So once again, data cleansing example is basically replacing, you have a data set and data set or table, and you have a specific column and there are null values in that column, and you want to replace those null values by a specific value. And what that would do is that would improve data quality and data accuracy. So that's the example for data cleansing. And if you look at data transformations, think of a table that would not make sense if you don't join it with another table, or if you don't merge it with another table. So in that case, when you join those two tables, it would gradually improve data quality and accuracy there as well, right? So those are just two examples of data cleansing and data transformations. I hope you are pretty much clear in terms of what data preparation is and uh, how does data cleansing and transformations work in terms of adding value. Right, now that you guys have an understanding of a modern data warehouse, the modern data warehouse architecture, and the data preparation itself, now it's time for us to look at the Azure Data Factory Power Query feature, which is what this session is all about. Previously, this particular feature was known as Wrangling Data Flows when it was released in 2019 November, as far as I remember. They were it was released as two types of data flows, as mapping data flows and Wrangling data flows. So as soon as they released mapping data flows into a general availability, they put out Wrangling data flows to public preview. So so it had been around in public preview for around 1.5 years, I guess. And it was released, taken out of public preview, and it was generally available in 2021. I guess it was November. I'm not really sure. Sorry about that. So that's around 2 years if it's November. So so that's just a bit of history about how the Power Query feature in Azure Data Factory. Right. So the key advantage of Power Query in Azure Data Factory is that it's code-free or no code. Basically, you don't need to code for your data preparation tasks. So, for example, in other words, you don't even need to know SQL. You don't need to know PySpark. You don't need to know Python. So you don't need to know any kind of language in order to go on with your data preparation. You can simply use this no code or code free feature, Power Query feature, and engage in your data preparation very easily. In other words, the Power Query that you will see in Azure Data Factory is very similar to the Power Query that you guys are pretty much used to in Power BI and even Excel. So that's just a bit about that. And the other point I want to raise is that whatever the Power Query or the M language that you use will be converted to Spark code in the backend. So if you guys don't know what Spark is, Spark facilitates big data workloads and is a unified engine for large-scale data processing. So what happens is that the M language or the Power Query that you use in the front end or with the Power Query feature in Azure Data Factory is converted into Spark code in the backend and is highly optimized for big data processing. So that's just a bit about how the backend works. And with most of the features in Azure Data Factory, you can execute a Power Query in Azure Data Factory with a pipeline activity as well. So so that's pretty much straightforward, and I'll have a demo for that as well. So if you guys didn't understand what this feature is about in this particular slide, that's completely fine. I'll be having a demo in a moment, and you guys should be able to have a good understanding of this feature afterwards. And something important that I would like to highlight is, and something else that I would like to highlight is that the Azure Data Factory Power Query feature, or this Power Query feature, does not exist in Azure Synapse Analytics. So basically Azure pipelines. Basically, you can't use this with Azure Synapse pipelines. This feature only exists with Azure Data Factory for now. But in terms of mapping data flows, which is another type of a data flow, you have it in Azure Synapse Analytics, which you can use it with Azure Synapse pipelines, and also you have it with Azure Data Factory, which you can use with the Azure Data Factory pipelines. So that is a bit about that. Right. So previously, I walked you through the modern data warehouse reference architecture, and if I take your attention to this particular section in this architecture, which is ingest, row, and prep and train, you can see that Databricks is suggested as the default technology for data preparation, right? So what we'll be doing in this session is, instead of showing you that, what I'll be doing is that I'll be showing you how to use Power Query in this stage instead of Azure Data Factory, Azure Databricks. So that's what this session. That's what I want to present to you guys in this session. And if we look at a detailed view of this architecture, so of how it works, how this data preparation here works in data preparation works with Azure Data Lake. Let's look at the next slide. So in this detailed view, firstly, you will have the data sources, and you will have the usual data ingestion, which would load data into your Azure Data Lake to a zone called, or a particular section called row in Azure Data Lake. So just keep this just keep that in mind as a section of Azure Data Lake, and I would explain zones after I take you through the flow. So firstly, we have the multiple data sources, and data is ingested from multiple data sources into the row zone, the row section in Azure Data Lake, and the ingested data is referred by Power Query feature in Azure Data Factory for data preparation, and the prepared data is loaded back into the stage zone, or the stage section in Azure Data Factory. So that's just a detailed view in terms of how the Power Query feature works. So the data preparation with Power Query works with the Azure Data Lake. If I, what are these zones? So I told you about the row zone, or the row section, and the stage zone. So these zones are used to organize files in a data lake. So there are so it's just a row zone and stage zone for now. There are many more zones that you can use in a data lake solution, including curated zone, a user drop zone, and many more. So it's just I just kept the minimal required zones in this particular presentation, so that it won't be too complex for you guys, and it would be easy for you guys to understand. So that's just a bit about that. And also, what I'm discussing throughout this particular section is structured data. There might be a different strategy that you have to put in place for unstructured data. If you are taking data from unstructured sources, you will have to convert the JSON or whatever the files into a structured format. So there would be some work around that. So that's basically a topic for another day. So I will not be talking about semi-structured data in this session. So this session would be entirely based on structured data. But yeah, you can use this with semi-structured data as well. So in terms of converting it to a structure a particular structure and loading it back to the data warehouse, to the state zone in Azure Data Lake. Right. So that takes us to the first demo today, so which is the creating the Power Query itself in Azure Data Factory. So let's quickly head ourselves into the Azure Data Factory environment and see how this should work out. Right, so I'm in my Azure Data Factory environment right now, and in this particular environment, you would see what I want to focus on is the Power Query, which is the Power Query feature in Azure Data Factory. So what I want to do is to create a new Power Query. So there are two ways I can create a new Power Query. One way is by if I just take you to the Home tab. So as soon as you log in, this is how it would look like for you guys, the Data Factory. And you need to navigate yourself to the Author section in Azure Data Factory. And in the Author section, you guys should be able to see under Factory Resources by the side in the left-hand side. In the right-hand side, you should be able to see a plus icon saying Add New Resource, and you can add your Power Query from there. Or else you can just head down into the Power Query section that you see right at the bottom of Factory Resources and simply add your Power Query from there. So for now, what I'll do is I would just click on the new Power Query option and I'll add my Power Query from here. Right. So as for this, I just need to refer to an input data set. In this case, I need to refer to an input data set to make sure that to use for data preparation. And something to keep in mind in this case is that your dataset should always have a schema. So if you guys use some kind of unified datasets, like, let me just show you one, like the stage DR, which is a unified dataset. A unified dataset is basically a dataset you use to load or you use to extract multiple data from multiple different locations in your data lake or your respective data source, any other respective data source. So if you have are planning to, so in that case, when you are using a unified dataset, you would not have a schema. Right, so everything would be handled by Azure Data Factory expressions, as you can see in the screen right now, and with the parameters. Right, so that's how a unified dataset works. And if you guys are using one, unfortunately, you guys will not be able to use that with the Azure Data Factory feature. Sorry, Power Query feature in Azure Data Factory, because with the Power Query feature, you would need to specify a data set with a particular schema. So if I just, you would need to specify a data set with a specific schema. So keeping that in mind, we would just refer to a predefined data set that I had defined previously for Power Query. I'm sorry, so I have Power Query input. And I would use this predefined data set for this demo. And this is basically, so that my data source is AdventureWorks DB, and I had just ingested some data into my data lake, which is this, which is what you see in the screen right now. So I had ingested some data. Sorry, there is a lot of hierarchy, file hierarchy involved, folder hierarchy involved in this, so it's a bit complicated. So I had ingested the data here, and which is customer, person, and territory. That's master data. Then I had also ingested transaction data here. I'll show you that as well really quick. So I have order detail and order header. So what I'm using right now is I would be I have created a data set referring to this particular file, which is the territory parquet file, which is located somewhere, which is located right here. which is in 2021, and it's 6 months. Yeah, basically referring to this particular territory Parquet file. And what I'm doing is I'll be reading that and creating a data set out of it with a schema. And I will be using that as my input data set for Power Query. Just because I can't use a unified data set, as I showed you, which is stage DL. So I can't use a data set like this. So you would see if you use a data set like that. So let me just show you how that looks like too. You would get a error message saying that a data set without schema is not allowed. And yeah, so basically you will need to have a pre-specified data set in order to with a proper schema in order to use the Power Query feature. So I would use this Power Query territory at this stage, and I would you can see that my Power Query would load in the back end. Right. If I just take you through this environment, so let it load. So you can see it's pretty much similar to what you guys have seen in Power BI and even Excel. You can see the query settings in the left-hand side of your screen, and in the right-hand side of your screen, and in the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the queries that you had used, and then you can see the transformations that you can use in the Home tab and Transform tab, and you can add new columns, pretty much similar to what the Power Query you see in Power BI and Power BI datasets and Power BI data flows. Right. So that's just a bit about that. And if I just take you through of this environment a bit more, you can see in the bottom right-hand side of your screen, you can see 3 types of views that you can go ahead with. So currently I am in this particular data view, which I see tabular data. And if you want, you can just see how the schema looks like by the schema view, which is this. And you can also see the diagram view, which just shows which source is this particular Power Query referring to, and so on. So yeah, so that's just a bit about the views, the 3 views that you can use as per your preference as well. And if I take your attention to options, so the options that you have the project options and you have the global options. So project options, you can select whether you want to auto detect column types and headers for unstructured data sources, which is something related to unstructured that, as I told you previously, which I'll not cover in this session. And also you have you can allow combining data from multiple data sources and so on. So those are the functionalities that you can enable with the project options. Then afterwards, you have something called global options, which is basically more like the global settings for Power Query in Azure Data Factory. And you can select the default editor view as the data view, which I showed you guys previously. You can move into the schema view if you prefer. And you can decide whether you want to show the step cost indicators, which indicates how costly each Power Query step is with a particular color and all. So basically, if it's red, it doesn't look good. But then you have yellow and you do have green as well. So that's just a bit about that. And you have the type detection to detect column types and everything. And then you have some options available in the data view, display preview content with monospaced font, show white space and new line characters, and enable details pane, and always allow parameterization in data source and transformation dialogues. So just some features that you can use in the global options that you can use as per your preference under global options. So that's just a bit about that global and local options that I just showed you. And next, let's focus on the Power Query itself. So if I just look at the Power Query itself, you can see that this is something different from Power BI. So you have something called ADF resource, which is referring to the respective data sources or basically respective data sources that you are referring to. And user query would be the query that would be used for data transfer, data preparation, and that would be loaded back into the new destination or the state zone, as I told you previously in data lake. Right, so in this case, I have the Power Query territory as my ADF resource dataset, and I would be referring to that in the user query. User query, as you can see. So you can see that in the advanced editor view in under the home tab. So if you go to home and just click on the advanced editor option, you see right here, you can see how it's referring to. And also you can see that in under the query settings in the right hand side of your screen, which says it's referring to the Power Query territory ADF resource or the data set. And that's the user query for you. And afterwards you have so that's how it works actually inside Power Query inside Power Query in Azure Data Factory. And so I just want to do a few things here. I just want to move back into my data view, and I just want to take off this schema view because I feel it's not necessary as for now. So I had just loaded in the territory data, as you can see in the screen right now. And I just want to have two queries. One query with the territory details and without the sales figures, and another query I want it with the sales figures, which would load it to a separate location. So this particular query, I'll make sure that it only has the territory details. So what I would do is I would delete whatever that's unnecessary for this particular query. That would this particular data, this particular set of data. That would be sales YTD, sales last year, cost YTD, cost last year, and all these unnecessary row ID columns and modified date columns, which would probably be unnecessary for me at the moment. So I would just simply click on that, and as with Power BI, and I would click on the shift my keyboard, and I would just select all the columns that I want removed, and I would just right click on one particular column, and I would click on the remove columns option that appears. So you can see most of the, as with Power BI, most of the transformations appear here. So you guys don't have to get yourselves into the tab itself under home transform or anything. You would see most of the options by right clicking. So you can see I had removed all the unnecessary columns, and that had appeared as a step in Power Query, as you can see in the screen right now. So that if you want to look at the M language view of it, so we can the actual M language view of it. So you can see it right here under advanced editor, as you can see in the screen right now. So I had basically removed the columns from this particular source, which is PQ territory, sales YTD, sales last year, cost YTD, and all those columns are taken out. So that's just my one of those. That's just one of my data sets. And the next thing I want to do is I want to duplicate this, and I want to create another query with the sales figures. So in this case, I would just say use a query with sales for now. And what I would do is I would simply remove this step. So you can see the remove column step had replicated when I duplicated as well. So I would simply remove that step right now by just clicking on the particular cross icon that you see next to the step. So when I click on that, that would simply remove, and I would get back to the usual stage which I was in, which is just referring to the Power Query territory feature. Power Query territory reset under ADF resource. So that's that. And I would want to just take off these two unnecessary columns right now. So I would just select these two columns once again and right click and click on remove the columns. Right, so I have the sales figures and I have the territory details, so I'm all set to go. So I have a separate query that's just preparing my data with the sales figures. And I have another query that's preparing my data without the sales figures that would be loaded to a separate location. So this query, which is called user query, will be loaded to a separate location in the state zone in Azure Data Lake. And this query would be loaded to another location in Azure Data Lake. So that's just a bit about that in terms of how this would work out. And that is that for you. And yeah, so as you can see in this Power Query environment, it's very similar to the Power Query in Power BI. You can merge columns. You can simply do anything and everything that you do with Power BI, but it says, as you can see in the as it shows up as a warning at the top of your Power Query saying that not all are yet compatible. So which means that they are still working on getting some of those features from Power Query in Power BI into the Azure Data Factory environment. But as per my concern, most of the features here can still be used, and I didn't identify any kind of feature that you can't use during all the R&D and experiments that I had worked on. So that's just a bit about that. So that's the environment actually. And basically, I am done with my Power Query right now. And what I want to do is I just want to save this probably in an appropriate name. And so it's just Power Query. I would call that PQ territory. I would call it summit. And I would create my Power Query that way. And the next thing I want to do is I just want to publish this just to make sure that it's saved right. So I don't have, since this is just my Azure Data Factory R&D environment, I don't have a Git repository source control in place, but it would be a good practice even if you have a Git repository, even if you have some kind of repository, even with GitHub, just to make sure that you don't lose anything if anything does not work out right. But I think I had one configured previously and I removed it for some reason to configure it to another repository, and yeah, something didn't work right there. So that's just a bit about that, which is addition. Right. So I have my Power Query set up there, which is Territory Canadian Cloud Summit, which I had created as you can see in the screen, in the left-hand side of your screen, Territory Canadian Summit. So that's the Power Query that we worked on and that we created. And what I want to do next is I want to configure the pipeline activity, right? So the next thing, what that means is basically calling the Power Query that we use, calling this particular Power Query that we just created, Territory Canadian Summit, and configuring it to a respective Power Query, respective pipeline activity. So how I do that? First thing you want to do is create a new pipeline. So you can create a new pipeline by clicking on the plus icon that you see right next to the factory resources. Or you can just simply navigate yourself to pipeline under factory resources, and you can just click on the new pipeline option. And that would create a new pipeline for you. And I would just call, I would just simply leave it pipeline for now. I guess that wouldn't be a problem. Probably I don't have another pipeline called pipeline, so that's that. Right. And I would simply, the next thing I want to do is sorry, I just brushed myself off there. So the next thing I want to do is navigate myself into activities, uh, activities section, and under the pipeline, and I would just search for Power Query. And you should see the Power Query option that would pop up when you search for Power Query, and all you need to do is just drag and drop that into your pipeline. And then you can provide a name as usual. I would leave it Power Query for now. And you don't have much configurations to do in this first tab, which is the general tab, which is just about setting a name for the pipeline activity description, and you can set a timeout limit, and you can set up a retry limit and retry interval, and you can do such stuff which are pretty much general and with like almost all the Power data factory activities. So nothing special about that. And if you navigate yourself to the settings tab, so what I had done once again is I had just clicked on the Power Query that I just dragged and dropped into my screen. And when I click on the Power Query activity that I just dragged and dropped, this particular section, this particular tabs would pop up, and this particular section would pop up in the bottom of your screen. So and in that you have general settings, which I just took you guys through, and then you have settings. And under settings, you would have all the Power Query. You would need to select the Power Query that you want to work with, and you have to select the integration runtime. So in this case, since it's based on Azure, it's auto-resolve integration runtime. So no problems there. Then you want to select whether it's going to be a memory optimized or compute type is going to be memory optimized or general purpose. In this case, I'm using general purpose. And you have to decide the cores based on your necessity. So you can go up to 256 cores. But I'm just going it for cores since this is a really small data set. And then you have a new section which came up really recently called staging. That is actually entirely related to if you are working with Azure Synapse Analytics. Basically, if you are using Azure Synapse Analytics for your Synco source, which is not happening right now. So let's not focus on that. So the first thing I want to do in here is basically select my Power Query, right? So I would just click on the dropdown that I see under Power Query, and I would navigate myself into the territory Canadian Cloud Summit, which is the Power Query that we created. And I would read the rest of the settings as the same. I would not do changes to that. So my integration runtime would be auto-resolve integration runtime. Then my compute type would be general purpose, and I would be using 4 cores for this purpose to run this particular data preparation task in Power Query. And if you head yourself down to the same section, you would see the 2 queries that we worked on previously. One, the user query itself, which does not have the sales figures, and then the user query with the sales figures, right, which we created previously in the Power Query. And what you can do is, in this case, you can use a unified dataset. So I have set up created a unified dataset for that, which I showcased you previously, just to show you around, which is called stage DL. And all you want to do with that is basically set up to just provide your table type. So in this case, it would be master. And you just need to provide your folder name. So I would call this folder as territory without this. So I just don't want to waste time thinking of the most appropriate name. So I would just go with this. And I can simply use the same data set for my second query as well. And all I need to do is I just want to change this to just territory, right? Territory vectors. Right. So what this would do is this would load your data into the state zone. So this would be with cells, and this would be without cells. So that would be literally load your data into your respective. I'm sorry, just made a mess out of it there. So stage, the user query is referring to without cells, and then for with cells we can set up the. Once again, we can use the same data set as the stage 3L, and we just want to change the parameter folder into with cells so that it would load into a separate folder called with cells. So what this would do, as I told you previously, is it would load the prepared data into the stage zone in your Azure data lake. And it would load in as territory without cells into two separate folders as territory without cells and territory with cells. So that's basically how it would work out. And so that's basically how I configured my pipeline activity. And I would not be running this pipeline because executing this pipeline might get a while, and I don't want to waste your time doing that. So I would not be running that at the moment. So so that's just a bit about that, and that would take us to the final demo, which would not be nothing much, just showcasing you some other sample pipeline Power Query that I had just built on, which would be very, very basic if you guys have worked with Power Query in Power BI before. So that's just a bit about that. So I would quickly get you into that and showcase those pipelines, those Power Query that I have worked previously. So the first one I want to showcase is Power Query Customer. So I wouldn't showcase Power Query Territory because we went through Power Query Territory and I showed you how I had gone about that. So here, once again, you can see that if you navigate yourself into ADF users, which shows the data sets or the sources that you are referring to for this Power Query, you can see there are two sources, right? You can see PQ customer and PQ person, right? So what I'm doing is that I'm just taking both these sources and I'm just going for a merge with the person ID, and I would be merging these two, and I would be basically I would refer to PQ customer as my source, and I would merge it with PQ person, PQ customer with PQ person with the person ID. And I would just expand on whatever the necessary columns or the necessary attributes in PQ person. And the next thing I want to do is I would remove whatever the unnecessary columns. And that's basically how my data preparation went for customer. So you can see the highlight of this is not the merge, not the expand, not any other Power Query activity. It's the use of multiple ADF resources, so the multiple data sets to fulfill a single query, right? So that's just a bit about that. And if you look at PQ cells, it's a bit slightly advanced, but there is so much complexity over there. Still, so in here also we are referring to two resources. One is the PQ order header and PQ order detail, which are the order detail and order header tables. Once again, two tables. Two tables or two data sets or two sources that you're referring to, and into a single user query. Just a bit of you can see there is more Power Query used and more transformations happening here. So so that's just a bit of that. So simply, firstly, you are taking the order header table and you are merging it with the order line items or the order detail and expanding on whatever the necessary columns, and then removing the unwanted columns, then reordering the columns for easy understanding. Then afterwards, replacing certain values. I think they are null values as far as it just replacing some null values with -1. I guess it's a key column. I think it's for currency key that I'm doing that. So and finally, I'm just renaming some of the columns just for easy understanding as well. So that's just a bit about that. Some other scenarios that I had worked on. That actually concludes my session. I hope you guys got a good understanding of the Power Query feature in Azure Data Factory and how you can use it in one data warehouse solution. And once again, thank you very, very much for all the sponsors for sponsoring this event, like Canadian Cloud Summit. This such a conference or such a summit is not the easiest to organize without these amazing sponsors. So thank you very much for all the sponsors for being with us and organizing such a helping to organize such a great event. As I told you previously, you guys also have an opportunity to win a $50 Amazon gift card by providing feedback to my session. So once again, if you can just scan through the QR code and just I have my session code once again here, which is 307548. So you can use that. You can scan through the QR code and simply apply for this draw and win a gift card. So that's a possibility. And and I have my QR code, as I told you previously, once again here, it's 307548. Please use that to provide me with your feedback. And I would really appreciate your feedback, either positive or negative. I just want to improve myself further as a speaker and contribute better to this community. So please feel free to provide any kind of feedback to me. And I would definitely consider that in my future sessions. And thank you very much, Matt, for moderating my session and organizing such a great event along with the other organizers. So yeah, thank you very much for having me. And please don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn, and also you guys can follow me on Twitter as well at Thimantha. So yeah, so we can go for any questions if there are any.